Chapter 2. A profitably problematic business venture. Suddenly the whole place got caught in a series of earthquakes. Tremors had been common since the operation got big, mostly thanks to the absolutely careless use of an explosive concoction deemed by the group as Orcus's toilet during taco night, which they originally got very early in the campaign from a Bedouin alchemist. The guy was a quack, and I never expected the characters to try to replicate his formula, which involved rather worrisome amounts of camel depositions, which has turned what once was a beautiful and very sacred Osirian temple into a gaping hole the size of a stadium in the middle of the desert, with the elemental rift standing at its center. They had the miners dig underneath the rift so salt falls out through the portal and accumulated in a massive pile from which it is then loaded onto one of the dozens of leather conveyors powered by slaves inside hamster wheels. But now they were getting particularly powerful. As Valinar was quick to guess, he's the party's expert on cosmological stuff, the rift had become dangerous and potentially unstable. His successful knowledge, the planes rolls, allowed him to guess what was going on. The rift had been pouring out such massive amounts of material from the para-elemental plane of salt that the native elementals were becoming restless. Elemental planes in the planescape conception, which is the one I use even though we are playing in Golarion, are sort of sentient by themselves, with elementals being manifestations of said planar awareness. Long story short, elementals started pouring out of the rift, first a few, 1d4 small elementals per day until grown to chaotic proportions, 1d100 small elementals plus random amounts of bigger ones per day. Workers, guards, and overseers were now getting killed by dozens each day, but there were enough people to spare at first, since by then a whole village had started to form in the areas surrounding the operation, with all kinds of people settling there, either for work in the mines and refinery, to serve somehow in the related services, or to make money off the people working there, setting up taverns, brothels, lots and lots of brothels of very, very ugly women. Still, Vorgok managed to institute his own version of Prima Nocta, and it became mandatory for every new harlot in Saltspit, that's how they named the incipient town, to spend her first night of service with Vorgok. Some of them don't survive past that night. Keep in mind, we are talking about 5 months in-game down the road. Since the campaign had become more focused in long-term events, we sped up the time rate. So this elemental outbreak quickly turns into a big threat, and the rogue hurries back to Katapesh to get support from his main associate, Prince Osman bin Hazir, who sends him back with his personal Mage Vizier, and a host of soldiers from the Zephyr Guard, Katapesh's finest soldiers. The prince was powerful enough to pull those kinds of strings. They manage to battle the elementals, but one thing catches Hassan's attention. The Mage Vizier has somehow commanded the elementals with a rod. I gave him a rod of elemental compelling, which allowed him to force elementals of lesser power to perform certain actions. The idea was to have him pull the elementals back into the borehole so the guards would surround them. Purely for stylish reasons. Foolish me, I should have seen what would come afterwards. So let's move 1 week into the future. The situation had been controlled and the mines were being repaired. But wait, elementals keep pouring out at a regular rate. But Hassan had noticed how the rod commanded the force of small elementals into moving in a particular direction, so he figured so far we have been collecting the salt, processing it here, loading it onto camels and sending it to Katapesh, but what if the salt went there by itself? And so he managed to convince the prince to have his Mage Vizier craft a few more rods of elemental compelling. The components had to be taken from an obscure location in the Mwangi jungles, which served as the pretext to get these nascent capitalists back into adventuring for a couple of sessions, which were then given to hired mage overseers so they would command the salt elementals from the mines to Katapesh. A special processing facility was built in Katapesh, where the elementals would be led into a large funnel-like structure lined with metal rings enchanted with dismissal spells, thus sending them back to their plane and allowing the remaining salt to be refined. The rings weren't too powerful, so it was common for elementals to go through unharmed and cause havoc in the ovens underneath. But the pay was good, so the work hands were aplenty. This, combined with the regular caravans that still went back and forth day and night, as a lot of the salt was just regular sand without a CR, skyrocketed profit, to the point where the party could finally start building their much-desired fortress near the mines, which included hiring a conjuration specialist to make them their own oasis, which led to some other business opportunities, but more on that later. However, it came with a cost. With the rift churning out elementals day and night at progressively higher rates, alarms began ringing among some leaderheads at Katapesh. How much was envy for the profits and how much was actual concern is another matter altogether. who cited issues like the ludicrous increase of travelers being attacked by rogue salt elementals, which had increased from 0 to way more than 0 in less than a year. Prince Osmond managed to calm things down a bit by setting a series of permanent guard outposts along the salt route to make sure all the elementals that escaped the caravans were slain, which led to an entertaining session where the characters were now the ones hiring adventurers just like them to do the job. But trouble was starting to brew. No better way to make enemies than success.